This is maybe a little bit more beginner friendly if you've just started painting out miniatures and you're looking at the Citadel range, like the Games Workshop paint. There's a bunch of like different types, and that's one of the questions I get the most. I think at the store, a lot of people, they just go in front of the rack and they go, do I need a base? Do I need a layer? What's a shade? What's gone? So just talk about the different like kind of kinds of paint, even just within the same same brand, right? Just the Citadel paints. Then the first thing is Citadel paints are acrylic and water based. That's kind of an important thing. So you don't need special thinner. Water works just fine. You don't need anything fancy. Water, good to go. Yeah. So the most important thing I think is Citadel paints is one of those. Well, all the paints really for miniatures are one of those like specialty products where buying an actual like range has a purpose. Whereas I say this a lot, like hobby knives is probably the biggest like culprit. Like hobby knives like this, it's such a generic thing, right? Like it's an X-Acto blade or even a scalpel blade, and then something to hold it that's not like your fingies, So you don't really need like the Citadel one. It's got some features, but it's not like very different. I mean, the blade at the end, the part that cuts here, is the same thing on like every one. Like I could use this on another knife. It would be the same thing, so to speak. Paint, not like that. You actually pay for something that's like really good. Even in like a wider artistic sense, Citadel paint is actually really high quality acrylics for two reasons. First of all, there's a lot of pigments in it, which means it covers really well. And the pigments are somewhat thin, and that's a big issue when you come to thin it down, especially for stuff like metallics. And that was one of the distinguishing feature of P3, because they use liquid pigments, or something that was called liquid pigments, which technically made it like super the thinnest of thin pigments. But let's not get into this. P3 is a garbage paint for garbage people. No, I'm just fucking around. This is a subject for another time. But so Citadel paints, you actually end up paying for something that's high quality. And now the biggest like perk, I guess, of Citadel paints is their goal is that you can buy a paint pot and use it and do that with every single thing. So they're not really into you have to mix this and mix that. Like if you're an old school type guy, you remember the old like shades and the old washes, you'd have to go like full Walter White on the shit and just like try to mix it to get something usable, because it was just like straight up ink. They've kind of moved away from that, and they want you to just like look at the rack and go, this is for base. So I want to do the base coat of my mini, so I take a base, and then I want to highlight that with a layer, so I take the layer, and then I want a dry brush, so I take a dry paint, and I want to make a shade, so I take a shade paint, and that's kind of their whole thing. So they really want to make it like as foolproof of a system as possible, of just like use this for this. And that's kind of the governing idea. And so the two main ones I would say are the bases and the layers. And in all honesty, they're pretty much the same. The two main differences is a lot of the bases, the medium, like the thing that links kind of the pigments, if you will, is usually gray instead of translucent. And so that's why they cover better slightly. And then again, this is kind of it's not like a universal rule. Some layers cover a lot better than bases, and some bases just are great. And then the other thing is usually the color selection is much darker. So all the blues, for example, the ones I have here are all the blues. So the blue, which this one is, MaaAAxxX blue is the base. It's probably darker than any of the layers, making it great for a base coat, because usually you want a darker base coat than whatever you're going to highlight, because that's how painting works, right? And then the layer is just like your everyday paint, but you can use both for both. Like you can do base coats with layers, and you can do highlights with bases. There's no problem with it, and you won't really see the difference. And then you have kind of the specialty ones, and the specialty ones is kind of where Games Workshop like shines, as in if you want something very specific, they make it. And then you buy it and you use it and you're happy. Dries are kind of one of the things I prefer. Like there's a couple of colors. I would not buy the entire dry range, but the couple of colors that I love, I really, really love. Terminatus Stone, Longbeard Gray, I think it's called, Necron Compound, and the gold. I think it's called Sigmarid Gold. These colors are just amazing. Let's use this one, Oed Blue here. And Oed Blue is a weird one because there's another one called Oed Blue that's not a dry brush. But dries are only for dry brushing. It comes out of the pot, it's like sticky. It's like if you were to open that and think it's normal paint, you go like, oh, this one's bad. It's like all bunched up. It's made like that, and it's made to make dry brushing foolproof, basically. The two issues you can have with dry brushing is your paint's too thin or you have too much on your brush. Well, this kind of removes at least one of them. It's never going to be too thin. It's just like, it's made that way. And it's really hard to get a lot on your brush because it's all sticky and stuff. The downside is, if you buy this, you're stuck with dry brush only for this color. There's no saving it. There's no using it for anything else. Whereas if you buy a layer paint, you can layer or you can dry brush. You know, you just don't get the easy mode of it. These ones I've not sold like a lot, but the ones I sell constantly because they're so great. Again, Necron Compound and the light gray, whatever it's called. Oh, money. They're great. But only do dry brush. And then the shade, I have the biggest problem with the shades, because shading is a technique. You know, it's a thing in miniature painting. And then the assholes, James, you asshole, they name their inks or their tones or whatever you want to call them shades, and that is so confusing. I want to shade this, but then I want to use the shade. It's so frustrating because they use the same. Obviously you get what it's used for. But I wish they would call them washes, because if that range was washes, it would just be so simple. But basically, so the shades are kind of their inks, and that's one of their great products. Like the Games Workshop shades, they behave like nothing else. They do their own thing, and they are great. They are great, and that's the one thing that you probably can't replace, right? Like the layers and the bases, you switch for like Vallejo, Army Painter, and whatnot, and you're gonna get like something very similar, and some colors work better in one range and the other. Shades are very different. Like the tones from Army Painter, which are the same thing, completely different. And the Vallejo inks or game inks, and then the AK, I don't even know what they call them, completely different. So and the shades are, in my mind, kind of great. And then the contrast. The contrast is my favorite product because it goes from one end of the spectrum of like easy mode to the high end of like super advanced mode, and I love it. The more I paint with them, the more I love them because I find new uses all the time. So they're marketed, if you will, as like super basic stuff of like you paint your model like in a light primer, and then you slam your contrast on it and you are done. It does all the thing for you, which it kind of works, but it's also very, very limited. As in, first of all, this like just straight up like primer and contrast, it's not giving you good results really. You can do just a little bit more with something like a slap chop with like darker primer and then lighter primer on top, or a bunch of different things. But also these things are amazing. If you start to like thin them down and play with them, you can do a lot of things. There's like, I think it's Darren Latham that does like non-metallic metals with only contrast, and it's mind-blowing. So the contrasts are essentially a mix between the shades and the paints. Really, it's kind of an in-betweener. So they're thicker than the shades, but they're also more translucent than the paints. And they're really great for glazing, which is what the way that I use them most of the time is glazing. So instead of letting them do kind of their own thing and letting them like pool and dry like a shade, I like one even coat of something and it tints the color into what I want. And that gives you like a lot of room, a lot of play with it. You can, depending on what you do underneath the contrast, like you get a lot of fun, lots and lots of fun. And so the contrast, although they really market them for like this easy one step you're done thing, it kind of goes into great lengths of like high end stuff, and that's really one thing where I think they don't put kind of value into there because that's not what they want out of them, but it's really great. If you're like an advanced painter and you're looking for advanced, like more techniques, contrasts are great alternatives to shades because they give you more control, basically. If you're willing to fuck with them, which is, again, Games Workshop, their whole system, their whole idea is you take them out of the pot and it works. And that's going to fine. But this one, if you're willing to dabble a little bit. Whew. So I hope that kind of explains it to you. Again, this is maybe more beginner than the stuff I usually do, but this is a question I get a lot of times of people just like staring at the rack and just like questioning what's what. Well, that's what. And then why? How do I put this? I usually say this thing in French because clients here are French. So I have to think about my thing in English now.